Perhaps it's unnecessary to describe how difficult it is to raise a child alone and deal with all the financial difficulties. I was in such a state for 5 years after divorcing my husband. Our son Dimitri was growing up without seeing his dad. I didn't see my ex either, only occasionally. Several times a year, payments would come to my account. I didn't want to sue him for child support, he would have found a way out anyway. So, I managed on my own. I managed quite effectively, climbing up the career ladder and pulling in a monthly sum to the account. It became somewhat easier, I could afford more. And most importantly, Dimitri could. He had fancy toys, and we started regularly visiting paid playgrounds and cafes. Eating ice cream. At one of these events, I met Alexander. He accidentally bumped into our table with his bag, and the ice cream vase fell from my son's hand. He was upset to tears, and the culprit of the incident hurried to the bar counter and, within a minute, brought a double portion of ice cream sprinkled with chocolate to Dimitri. He apologized. I smiled in response. Alexander took it as an invitation to continue the conversation and asked if he could join us. Before I could say anything, Dimitri, bribed with ice cream, nodded. Of course. Alexander and I laughed at the boy's hospitality and started talking. Seeing us off to the entrance, our new acquaintance asked for my phone number. I didn't flirt and handed him my business card. It had been printed recently from the company where it stated that I held the position of procurement department manager. Reading my title, Alexander nodded respectfully. Wow, may I call you? I nodded affirmatively, and my son and I went home. That day, Dimitri mentioned Alexander a couple of times. Not bad, a fun guy. I also thought about the cafe meeting, not knowing where it would lead. In principle, nothing supernatural happened, everything went its course. At first, we met on weekends, once a week, then Alexander stayed overnight once. Visits turned into a different dimension, he came on Friday evening and stayed until Monday morning. He got along great with Dimitri, and I was satisfied with Alexander too. In short, the prospects were logical and predictable. 3 months later, during dinner, Alexander said that he actually didn't want to leave our apartment and suggested formalizing our relationship. I agreed. Dimitri didn't understand what formally meant, but he figured out that Uncle Alexander would now live with us and was happy about this turn of events. But the next morning, there was a 180-degree turn in a different direction. Over breakfast, as Dimitri finished his omelette and ran off to watch cartoons, I, remembering the disagreements with my ex-husband about money, decided to address this issue with Alexander beforehand. During our acquaintance, he never spent money on our meetings, except perhaps to pay for ice cream at the cafe. He ate heartily. Naturally, I bought groceries and cooked much more than just for myself and my son. But Alexander never once suggested buying something substantial like meat, cheese, or fish, so I brought up the topic. Alexander, since we've decided to live together, let's sort out our budget, I said, and immediately he became wary. What do you mean? He asked. It's simple, we'll split the expenses 50-50. It's too much for me alone to bear the cost of utilities and groceries. Do you mind? Alexander flared up. You know I have an elderly mother, and I'll be helping her. Is there something wrong with that? It all comes down to money. It seems to me, it's just typical mercantilism. The conversation escalated. I never considered myself mercantile. To hear this from someone who yesterday was planning to become the head of the family was unexpected and more than unpleasant. Alexander tried to educate me, and I simply pointed to the door. Dimitri, who came running after cartoons, asked with surprise where Uncle Alexander had gone. I hugged him and sighed, saying, home. He changed his mind about living with us. Throughout the day, until I blocked Alexander's number, I received several offensive messages, and I was convinced that I had made the right decision. It's just a pity that Dmitri had become attached to him, and now I'll be more careful in acquainting him with kind uncles who might only treat him to ice cream.